Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Tibet, our neighbor, as a matter of fact. A lot of us have actually always called it the India-China border. Well, one thing that we need to make certain, it is the India-Tibet border. To discuss India, Tibet, China, and this whole amalgamation of issues, I have with me someone really special. Mr. Tsering Passang, who is the founder and chairman of the Global Alliance of Tibet and Persecuted Minorities, and of course, our very own Lieutenant General Ravi Shankar, a former Director General of the Artillery Indian Army. Thank you both for joining me. And Mr. Passang, especially you from UK, you've been busy over the past week on the Tibet Uprising Day, which is on the 10th of March. I'm sure there's been a lot which is taking place. We can see the imprint online as well. And so thank you for joining us from, and taking some time out from your busy schedule to give us your thoughts about what is happening within Tibet and, of course, its interaction with China.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity and inviting me to share thoughts on Tibet and what the Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party is doing in Tibet all these years. To briefly speak about myself, as you said, Tsering Passang, and I was born in a refugee camp in Nepal. I personally have never been to Tibet yet. However, I have interacted with so many people and who have come from Tibet and have returned back to Tibet, whether they're students, artists, government officials, and also I've interacted with delegates, official delegations from Tibet and China, and I have directly asked questions. And I've also interacted with Chinese ambassador here in public domain, with sort of dignified manner. And I've also written publicly in the major newspapers, responding to Chinese government's big lies and so on. So, and also I've worked in a number of Tibetan charity sectors, which also worked in Tibet. So I am sort of familiar with lots of things happening inside Tibet, even though I personally have never been to Tibet. Now, the question is, what is happening in Tibet? My parents, especially my dad, he crossed the Tibetan border into Nepal when he was very young, and later joined the Tibetan resistance movement in Mustang, Tibetan guerrilla force. And I was born in a refugee camp, moved from one refugee camp to another, and so on. And I was educated in Nepal, and then later in India, and then later in UK. And for the last 20 plus years, I've been fully engaging, my full-time engaging in the Tibet movement, whether it is charitable work or campaigning work or on community level. Now, no matter, physically, I've never been experienced sort of torture or anything like from the Chinese government, but mentally, up to this day, every day I think about Tibet. And my father always say he wants independence for Tibet. And I also tell him that Dalai Lama is not seeking independence, seeking genuine autonomy, which means to remain within the People's Republic of China and so on. And he said that if, I will not return to Tibet until Tibet get independence. However, if Dalai Lama returns to Tibet, then he will return to Tibet. Now, this is how the elder generations are thinking. Now, he is 72 this year and a member of the Tibetan Youth Congress. And he's sort of physically, he's not that good. But now, me, I am a younger generation, educated, Western educated, and I have different thinking or different, in terms of believing in religion, not strong as my parents. But in regards to Tibet political or freedom struggle, I'm very much strong. And I believe, like many other Tibetans, we will continue to remain like this. Now, over the period of time, observing the situation in Tibet, as you know, the historical facts, Tibet, after Mao Zedong declared the so-called peaceful liberation of Tibet from foreign imperialists in 1949, and a year later he sent PLA troops, invaded certain part of eastern Tibet, and after the 1951 17-point agreement, Dalai Lama was very young, 15, 16-year-old, very young man, and with his cabinet, obviously we didn't have good international or relations or anything like that. But, we were very busy in our own world. Like, our spiritual technology is so great, whereas modern technology, we are almost nil. But so we are very much sort of absorbed within in trying to improve, develop our inner values, In that sort of situation, China and Mao Zedong bullied Tibet, basically, signed that agreement. Obviously, Dalai Lama, we didn't have, you can see what's happening in Ukraine today. And we didn't have the modern arms and ammunition to challenge. And of course, we were not going to beat them. Obviously, the spirits are very, very high. But in terms of ammunition or weapons, we were not there. So obviously, Dalai Lama tried to work within the definitions or the terms of agreement, although it was forcibly signed by the Tibetan delegates had to forcibly sign because of the threats issued. And over the 9 years period, despite the best efforts on the Tibetan part, the Chinese were getting stronger and stronger, and basically they won complete control and capitulation of the Tibetan side to the Chinese. And finally, as I said, mentioned in my posting a few days ago, there were no choice. Tibetans surrounded the Nobulinga Palace, like 30,000 Tibetans. And they did not want Dalai Lama to join the Chinese or attend the Chinese theatrical show at the local Chinese barracks. And for Tibetans, they were fearing either he would be kidnapped or they would harm him. And for Tibetans, Dalai Lama eats everything. So Dalai Lama was between, as he put in his autobiography, My Land and My People, I was in between almost like a solid rocks. Tibetans, willing to sort of die to shield him from the sort of shelling or mortars from the Chinese side. And, and the Chinese were ready to shell. So, that was a tense situation. And despite the efforts to disperse the Tibetan crowds, it was not resulting any, it was not, basically Tibetans were not going away. And finally, a week later, on 17th of March, he fled Tibet. And a few weeks later, very, very, Tibetans feel so generous, so kind to the Indian government, successive Indian government and the Indian public for giving Dalai Lama a political asylum. And of course, with him followed some 80,000 Tibetans. And today, our culture, our political freedom struggles is also stemmed from that situation, from that year after reestablishing the Tibetan government in exile. Now, inside Tibet, since then, obviously for the next 10, 20 years, there were literally no communication between India, between Dharamsala, Central Tibetan Administration, and Chinese regime. But after Deng Xiaoping sort of initiated what he called open China and showed willingness to engage in discussion with the Dalai Lama, and we know subsequently a few delegations from India, Tibetan side, went to Tibet, and I think that opened up, and that have opened up lots of positive communications from both ends, coming in and out of Tibet, helping towards the preservation of Tibetan language, culture, and so on. At the same time, more importantly, building or reconnecting the trust between the people, and the continued devotion even though young Tibetans in Tibet who have never seen the Dalai Lama, but because of this inflow of communication, inflow of people, traveling, I think that has really upped the, what do you call it, closeness of Tibetans of Tibet on both sides. Now, the recent time, what we now know is that China has been strengthening its control on Tibet all across Tibetan region. For example, I share you this. If you are Tibetan living in Kham, Eastern Tibet, or Northeastern Tibet, Amdo, and if they want to go to Lhasa, let's say Chogang Temple, that's a big Tibetan pilgrimage site for pilgrimage, and Tibetans are not allowed to travel freely. You would need lots of paperwork, even if you're Tibetans, and vice versa. Tibetan from Lhasa, if you want to go to Kham or Amdo, you have similar restrictions. Now, recently I'm hearing that Tibetans in Western Tibet, like Ngari, is closer to Lhasa, and they are also not allowed to go to Lhasa. Now, these restrictions of movement, if not complete ban against the Tibetans, it's something unimaginable in their own homelands. Now, if you are Han Chinese from mainland China coming for tourism in Tibet, you can travel freely without any restrictions. What does that mean? What does that mean? So this is the current reality. This is the freedom of movement. Now we're talking about, I know China says we pour in lots of money to help with preservation of Tibetan language and culture and so on, rebuilding monastery. Now, we recently know that Tibetan monks are kicked out. Monks and nuns are kicked out from the Buddhist monasteries and nunneries. We recently learned about the demolition of big Buddha statues. Not the first one, second one even in Eastern Tibet. Now, we know Burmese Buddha in Afghanistan was demolished by Taliban. Now, this is Chinese CCP government who is making friends with Taliban, and this is exactly what the Chinese government is doing in Tibet. And they have no regards to the Tibetans, because Tibetans, over 95% of Tibetans are Buddhists. And this is the current reality and situation that Tibetans are facing in our own homelands.
Thank you, sir. I think that's a very hard-hitting introductory talk that you've given. General Shankar, sir, over to you. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think Mr. Passang has given a very nice overview of the current situation. I'd like to just highlight a point and leave it for Mr. Passang and for his consideration. What I have read is in that 17-point agreement, the opening clause itself says, I don't know why that is there. I don't know whether it's there or not. You should be the best judge for it. It says China did not enjoy any effective control for over the last 100 years and more over Tibet. Now, if this is correct, there's a legal loophole, because the 17-point agreement is the basic document based on which the PRC exercises control and sovereignty over Tibet. If this is there, it's a legal loophole and it has to be exploited. I don't know whether it's right. I'm right or wrong. It has to be exploited in some international legal forum. That's one point I'd like to leave with you. But having said that, the impression which we get outside is that there's a lot of development within Tibet. This generation of Tibetan people are far different from the previous generation of Tibetan people, like your father, who went through a lot of hardship and who have had to come out of Tibet. And they also have different viewpoints as compared to people who are not in Tibet at this point of time, like you, who are outside Tibet, maybe in India, maybe in Nepal, maybe in UK, and maybe in USA or any other place. Right? So, I don't know. I mean, while all of you who are outside Tibet, make a lot of effort to show up your cause. If that similar feeling is there within Tibet, have they started accepting? Obviously, from what you have said, Tibetans are almost second rate or second grade as compared to a Han Chinese. Is there a acceptance, or it's a silent acquisition, right? So that's the first point. And if, as far as Tibet doesn't accept its status, the people of Tibet don't accept their status, the rest we can take it forward, right? And of course, India will be very interested, because India always believes in being friendly with Tibetans, especially Buddhism, which has gone out from India, right? And we are the center of Buddhism, international Buddhism. There are a lot of links, and we also feel in India that the Chinese are not being fair to Tibetans, right? Uh, After the Beijing Olympics, a lot of steam out of the Tibetan movement has gone out because of various reasons. We'll not go into it. And today, it seems the international attention is towards people of Xinjiang and the Uyghurs, right? So I don't know where this is to go, and I don't know how India can help in this entire situation, right? And I'm not talking of the help being given to the Central Tibetan Authority in this thing. I think there has to be a parallel political and quasi-political movement which has to start outside that, the Central Tibetan Authority. Like, that's why we connected with you. And I also feel there is a requirement of our think tanks and people talking and getting more familiar with your situation and how you can influence the situation in Tibet. So these are the things which we are looking forward to. We are very open. And why I must tell you, for a long time after the 2003 agreement, where implicitly the government of India recognized Tibet as part of China, and China recognized Sikkim at that point as part of India, and there was a memorandum of understanding signed, and we had some kind of a border and peace and tranquility agreement, and things went okay. But off late, 2017, Doklam happened, when they wanted to do something, expand into Bhutanese territory, which is not theirs. And thereafter, they would have expanded into Indian territory. Then the Eastern Ladakh issue flared up. So we are not anymore comfortable with the Chinese, right? And in fact, if you remember, during the Eastern Ladakh problem, we used the SFF, which is largely a Tibetan force, right, to carry out our operations on Kailash Range. And for most of us who are in service and out of service, it found resonance across in Tibet. At least in the Indian community, it found great resonance. And we also feel that there's some resonance on the other side. Right. Now, be that as it may, I think the Ukraine example of people fighting for their own rights and fighting for their own homeland is quite a major example. I don't know whether the Tibetans within Tibet will go that way, or they have a reason to go that way also. Now, these are the questions which we have to, which come to our mind, because sooner or later, this issue has to seek a permanent resolution, whether it has to be done politically or militarily or quasi-militarily or in the gray zone, right, is open to question, right? And two great countries, or two huge countries like India and China, cannot exist in this kind of a limbo. And we definitely don't accept, at least we have started not accepting the fact that such a huge landmass like Tibet and the people of Tibet, who are fundamentally peace loving, can be put to this kind of a stress anymore, right? We are also seeking ways as to how to normalize the situation. Okay. And so that is why we started this dialogue, and we'll be interested to know your views as to how to take it forward.
Okay, shall I come in?
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for your amazing insights into the whole situation. And if I may touch certain points that you raise, for example, the China's in not having effective control over Tibet over the past 100 years. I think if there is this loophole, I think we should certainly explore it. And to be very honest with you, I'm not a law expert or legal expert, but if there is this loophole, I think we should explore it. That's what.
Because I read this as part of my research.
Okay.
So I think since you are a proper organization, you might like to explore it. That's the point.
Okay, thank you for that. And the second thing is how Tibetans in Tibet having this. Do they have the same feeling as some of us or those of us in exile wanting to challenge Chinese? I think given the real situation, even bearing or taking the portrait of Dalai Lama in Tibet, it's a serious crime in Tibet, and I think Tibetans are also pragmatic, that because of the unfortunately our enemy or our opponent is such ruthless, and they would do anything right in front of you. And in that situation, I think I was basically coming back to what you said earlier about this Ukraine, but the Tibetans are also willing to fight, similar to Ukraine's. I was, when this news was unfolding over 10 days ago, I was basically, it's the whole situation is reminiscent, of what happened in Tibet back in the 1950s. And I was telling this to some friends that, what Dalai Lama has done, I was saying earlier, 17th of March, he decided to leave Tibet. I mean, he could have said Tibetans to challenge or whatever, but he chose a different strategy. I think that really, cut down, losses of lives. Because if we had the ammunition or weapons to, plenty of weapons and ammunition to challenge, I think that would be something. Because I've heard from elders, because when I was in refugee camp, I used to interact loads with our elder generation, and they said, we didn't have enough weapons, otherwise we would have won. Their spirit was so high. So I think from the Dalai Lama's perspective, I think situation, he assessed from our side, and that would not have been wise to do. And I personally think, looking back, I think he made a really, really wise decision given that situation. Now, talking about the spirits of the Tibetans, I think Tibetan spirits are very, very high. Obviously, as I said, we are pragmatic, because at the moment, if you think there's not going to go your way, I think it's better to pause. We have not stopped it. We just pause it. It's a matter of time that we will rise, and we are waiting for that opportunity. Until then, we need to keep our flame alive. I think, and Tibetans in Tibet, and this is what we talk about it, and this is also what we try to do, help them to educate and, have this know-hows and able to be able administrator of their own homeland. So I met one student some years ago. I won't say which part of the region he went back, but his object was to go back and rebuild and to become an able administrator. And he want to make a real improvement. So these, and I also know that there are Tibetans who are Chinese Communist Party members. They become members because it opens more doors, opportunities. But deep down, their devotion, they have this sense of Tibetan, and their devotion to Dalai Lama is unquestionable. So that is there. And also we know that, probably we'll touch it later, but after 2008, the 2008 protests across Tibet, we have seen Tibetans studying in China, engaging in protests in a very, very different way. Because if we are doing protests the way we do in a free world, China would quash down immediately. So there's this Tibetan spirit is very much high. And the songs that we are hearing, there's some brave Tibetans openly singing songs about Dalai Lama. If they don't say Dalai Lama word directly, metaphorically they use something else like eagles or something, and they sing the song and they're referring to him as the champion of peace in the world, these sort of things. And Tibetans are also singing like, Tibetans, we need to unite, we need to maintain our culture and preserve our culture and our identity, we must not lose it. And these are done by Tibetan singers. Just recently, on 25th of February, there was a young Tibetan singer who engaged in self-immolation in front of Potala Palace. Although the Chinese government, obviously, we don't have the footage, how difficult it is. And Lhasa is probably one of the most heaviest controlled Tibet areas, probably in the whole world, And Chinese were saying that it was just an accident or something. But in fact, a young Tibetan, he was 25-year-old, and a well-known Tibetan artist singing. And his mother is also a very, very famous Tibetan singer across China. And his dad is also a well-known composer. Now, if you say an poor Tibetan does something, okay, poverty or whatever. But this guy, young man, who has full of life in front of him, why was he engaged in this? And his works are all written in Tibetan. And I think that shows that the spirit's there. They're trying to communicate through different mediums just to up the spirit, the flame of Tibetan struggle alive. So I would say, although we are not seeing, 2009, upward, up to now, 158 sublimations inside Tibet, and nearly half dozen outside Tibet as well. I think this says it all. Obviously, we were not able to, got much out from these self-immolations. It's sadly becoming like our numbers, but the global, the countries around the world, were not able to do much simply because the Chinese economic influence, power, and political power, I think because of all this, just squashed. Having said that, I'll give you another example. So I think it was 2011 or something. I met one former permanent permanent British ambassador to the UN, and he was telling me that his wife always, asked him to raise about Tibet in the UN, and he said that even though we would like to raise in the UN General Assembly, the China, they are in there, and it is virtually impossible to raise it. And what he said was that keep the flame alive. So what you're doing is doing the right thing. Keep the flame alive. So this is what I really feel. Feel that we should continue and we should not be silenced. Sometimes I know that some of us Tibetans, we get disheartened after so many years. We're not getting there. We have a saying in Tibetan, big tasks achieves through after a long time. So I think our task is a big task. It's if we are talking about small countries, between small countries, that's something. But we are challenging probably the next superpower, and we are completely opposite. I think Buddhist, and small number. So I think what Dalai Lama has shown, this path of non-violence. I think this strategy also, I think it is, sustained our freedom struggle for a long time. I think if we just jump straight to the shortcut or direct action, I think, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, how long our freedom struggle would sustain. So I think we have to look from all sides, and this is what I feel. Very, very open or candid.
Yeah, that's first class, no problem.
Great, actually, it's nice to have a very open discussion, and that's what we want to do here, to put across a very candid, open discussion that an average Indian could also understand and relate with. They could probably connect with this entire thing. All right. Now, sir, I think this has been a great preface to a discussion, and I'd request Mr. Passang to actually join us more often so that we could actually, because Tibet has a long history, and this whole India-China-Tibet triangle has been on since, for the past about 70 years. And it'll take some time for us to understand. This probably discussion would be a baseline to something that we would like to do forward to understand the issues a little more in depth. There are a lot of certain little things that I'm sure our audience would also bring about. And so we'd like to do this with you a lot more. Coming to a question that actually, one of the questions that I prepared for this thing to kind of round this initial discussion to a close is, Mr. Passang, we actually got news of certain Tibetans, and actually you and I were discussing this offline as well. Tibetans joining the PLA, and as a matter of fact, there was on both sides of a confrontation between the Indian Army and the PLA. They were Tibetans, and we saw the videos where the Indian Army guys were literally telling them, "Aren't you ashamed of yourselves?" So, what I want to talk about with you, and what I'd like to kind of request you to kind of answer that, is that the Han influence within Tibet and its region would have reached to a certain extent, and certain people would have kind of given into this particular, influence of the Chinese. Of course, these interactions with Indian soldiers who are Tibetan from origin, is going to spark a little bit of light in the opposite side. And being from the same blood and being from the same line, I'm sure there is a thought. We're all human beings. We understand what is happening. They might not express it openly. That's the first part. And the second part, generally speaking, in an overview, do you think there is enough interaction between India and Tibet today, or is there something more that needs to happen?
I think in regards to Tibetan being recruited into the PLA force, People's Liberation Army force, I think obviously there was Tibetans in the PLA before, but I think this new recruitment drive, especially among the young school children, I think that is quite scary to an extent. And also maybe desperation from the Chinese side as well. I think, obviously, armed forces in any country is also a good employment prospects as well. So there could be. When there are not many opportunities in government posts, for Tibetans, and if the Chinese government lures Tibetan into the armed forces with good wages after a short period of training, I think that could have tempted or could tempt Tibetans to. I think if this is how they devise their strategy, I think it's a very, very shrewd one from the Chinese side. And obviously, because Tibetan plateau is so high, and it is natural that Tibetans are more able to adapt than the Chinese coming from lowlands to Tibetan areas, especially the border frontiers, with India. So I think it's a new war, I would say, from the Chinese side. And probably it's also, they know that Tibetans are also in SFF, and Tibetans are also engaging in the border side. And it is a plan to face between Tibetans. That could be an object from the Chinese side. But in the long run, I think this could backfire to the Chinese government. And Tibetans are, no matter, whether you're Communist Party members or whatever, they are very loyal to Dalai Lama. They're very, very loyal to Dalai Lama. Maybe one or two exceptions in this day and age, because of China's pumping lots of resources, and he or she, or his or her only job is to bring down or cause harm to the Dalai Lama. But over 99.9% Tibetans are really, really very much loyal to the Dalai Lama. So I think in regards to this, basically young Tibetans, recruiting into the Chinese PLA force, I think it is going to backfire the Chinese in the long run. Now, your second question is, what can India and Tibet do more? Now, here Tibet, I'm assuming that you're referring to Dharamsala, Central Tibet Administration. Is that right?
I'll put it this way: whatever the Central Tibet administration is doing, and whatever the government of India is doing, is something which they are doing with a purpose.
Mm.
I will put it: what can we do outside that? That's the more important thing, because we need to expand this context, right? Whatever between the government of India and the CTA is a formal affair, and that doesn't have the capability to expand and create more, awareness. We are looking at things as to how to expand this cooperation. That's the point. That's the whole reason why we thought we could speak to you, so that some of our intellectuals interact with all of you. I mean, look, we are only two of us at this point of time, but if there's a forum where we can interact more, we can get more of our people to, interact with your this thing, and that might would lead automatically to something. I mean, I don't know what it is at this point of time, because unless we start interacting, we will not even understand each other. What we can do, we have to explore as we go along.
I think to start with, to come to the point, I think we can count on these leading whether you will call it leaders or serious activists or serious writers, or who really really trying to do something on the cause.
Yeah.
I think some sort of a summit or conference, I think, and more frequent communications, I think that would certainly help. And as we interact, we learn from each other, we develop our ideas further. And the key point is, Tibet is still under Chinese occupation, and we need to get Tibet Tibetans freedom from China. And I think, for example, in my own situation, I try to do my bit in my small connection. And when we do more, engage with more, you learn from each other, and then you can be more effective, basically, and produce a better outcome. So in that way, I think the communication, I think absolutely, and strategizing more to achieve hopefully desired outcomes.
Yeah, let's see where we go from. I mean, the whole idea is to expand the interaction.
As a matter of fact, the whole idea of bringing this across, and that's something I had spoken to you, Mr. Passang, is to ensure that there is a certain level of communication. I obviously, invited General Ravi Shankar to give us a military point of view as well, because that is one of the biggest angles to this entire story, with the current standoff between India and China, especially in the regions, and the Chinese are using the region of Tibet to actually put whatever forces on towards India. So it's actually important for us to look at a civilian point of view, a generic public people point of view, which is what you're bringing in, and the military point of view that General Shankar is bringing in. Yeah. And we could actually expand this into a more regular discussion of, issues where, for example, your angle of looking at China would be very different from how we look at it. Having a common set of let's call it an adversary, or let's call it an opposition, or whatever we may want to call it. It's going to be interesting for us to kind of look at it from two different eyes. You with your set of information, we with our set of information, and grow this entire thing to have a better understanding between both the sides. General sir, would you agree to this?
Yeah. This is only a start. Yeah. Right. This is only a start. In fact, just about last week, we had the second or the third interaction with someone from Taiwan. It's not as if we are right? We are looking at expanding our thing only, right? We look at geostrategy and geopolitics in a larger sense, unofficial view. Uh, so we want to open up different channels. So it's more of a channel and exchange of ideas and see where it goes. And definitely we are not comfortable with the PRC. Let me be very clear about that. Okay. And definitely we know that the Tibetan people are under subjugation for the past 70 years. But we are just opening up a channel. And I think we should leave it at that today, and let's see where we go forward.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Passang, for actually, as I said, you've been unwell as well, and you've still taken out the time for me. I'm grateful to you because the Tibet Rising has just gone by around the corner. I'm sure there's a lot which is there on your plate, and I've seen some of your talks. I've read a couple of your, articles. I think there was a recent one that you published in the Independent, and so on and so forth. So it's very interesting, and I'm actually honored to actually have you on the show. As General said, we'd like to expand this interaction with you and try and see how we can understand each other better.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I really appreciate. As you said, definitely we need to increase our communication. Definitely, and I am personally, as a Tibetan, really, really grateful, as I said earlier, to India and the people of India. And the successive governments, for this continued support for the Tibetans, and it is my strong belief that Tibetans and Indians and Tibetan India's relation must live forever. And this is my prayers, because Tibet is indebted to, the Buddhism came to Tibet, and the Tibetan writings introduced after Tibetan. King Songtsen Gampo sent his, some Tibetans to India and came back. And these are today, after centuries, the contributions, as Dalai Lama always say, the Nalanda tradition, it is contributing a lot around the world, and, bringing peace and harmony to individuals' life. And this is a big, big contribution. So it is such wonderful that we have great friends like India, and may this continue forever.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Till next time.
Thank you.
Jai Hind.